Today, we woke up and checked the news one day before the election and found a Fire Fauci chant being cheered at a recent Trump rally, and Trump was straight up tickled pink, talked about doing it after the election. Now, for those who have not been following along or somehow don't care enough to know, Dr. Anthony Fauci isn't just some sort of strange and distant partisan political stooge that has recently come to existence as Louis DeJoy or Amy Coney Barrett have in the last 3 years thanks to a generous donation to our glorious dictator, Old Orange Julius Caesar. And many might not understand that, so we're gonna lay it out real fair and even and credentially for you, as we feel that credentials are a serious part of judging how legitimate someone is. Or this is. Dr. Anthony Fauci is the longest standing and most senior active infectious disease specialist in our nation. Now, we know there might be exceptions to that, but this title, that's his to keep. He has, for about 40 years, been the top authority on how to handle numerous crises and epidemics that have struck our nation during presidencies on both sides. He has, throughout his tenure, dutifully and attentively cared for the administrations of the nation at large. He has the single largest field of applicable experiential knowledge for things like pandemics out of any American. Period. Full stop. So for our president to be so pleased at this, to be encouraging this sort of behavior and humoring his cult, and it is just that, in the fullest and most drastic swing of the pandemic, as we are in regardless of his claims, that is very concerning. Indeed, it goes beyond the standard level of concern because the absolute narcissism that bleeds out of this man at all times, but especially during this particular bottom clip on the original article, has become categorically dangerous. COVID is and always has been a preventable disease. Other countries have shown this. South Korea and Japan did great for themselves, but we didn't take a single note from their playbooks. Instead, we had a big orange Florida man in office actively ridiculing people and just not seeing it for me, that eventually gets the disease, becomes a super spreader, and leads to an even greater amount of health apathy than before, all days before a major election. No amount of president, as we see from Barrett, can stand in his way, and he and his administration are more than happy to do everything they said in Obama's presidency would be improper. At this point, it has become comparable to comic book villainy, and we're not trying to be hyperbolic about this statement. A man with no political experience and a cult following has installed a cult of personality into the upper echelons of our government, who spends his early mornings and late nights abusing and bullying people on Twitter and making up childish nicknames for his competitors. He spends his days depowering social structures in our nation, inspiring violent enforcement even as a vast portion of the population wants it depowered, and having crowds of people cheering to remove the most qualified specialists of our nation from positions that they can protect us from, only to replace them with cult member stooges who donate hideous amounts of money to his regime. As a great and terrible disease wrecks his nation, he continues to say that it is actively disappearing, even as it is clearly getting stunningly worse. He gathers huge number of people into tight spaces and then ridicules mask wearing, which leads to greater infection. He himself committed mail voter fraud and encouraged his own cult members to double vote, but says that it is the competition who will do this, even though he already has. He has called upon the evangelical religious community to tell them, and we're not joking, that his political competitor will destroy God and destroy America. He refuses to acknowledge anything outside of his very small media bubble could be anything but a rampant conspiracy theory the world over to overthrow him and his enlightened vision chosen by God. And yes, that is correct. Our president has said numerous times that he is indeed chosen by God. These are very much cult leader tactics straight out of Marvel's Doctor Doom. Except that Doctor Doom loves the people of his home country and affords them every single luxury. Sorry, this cult leader tactic straight out of communist China and all the preceding comic books based around that sort of regime. Meanwhile, one of his flunkies has said publicly that black people can go anywhere they want so long as they vote Republican. And that same man more recently said that women can go wherever they want so long as they're pro-life Christian and stick to family values, which just sounds like telling them they need to be housewives. This, again, is a real thing. This is an actual thing that's going down, but it should be on the pages of a Cold War era action comic. It is too late for this article to really mean anything, and our vote doesn't matter anyway, as we've been shown in 2016. But we really want to remind everyone, about what's going on around them. Feel free to have your beliefs. We don't actually begrudge people for voting Trump, as we understand that many vote, sadly, a party over country style, and most vote policy over candidate, which is generally smarter, though still regrettable if you ask us. However, Trump is not the candidate you want him to be. He's not even the candidate he says he is. The most basic statements he has made that could have been held up, such as him not playing golf because he'd been too busy, have been thrown in your face every time. He is a narcissistic comic book villain that needs to be removed from office. And those out there that support him need to understand that you can't get worse than generic comic book cult-style Kim Jong-un fascism. You can't. You might have some morals and feelings hurt because Biden doesn't completely support you. You might have special beliefs that you don't want to share with others, and Trump not being in office might make you feel less than. But at the same time, the other shoe was going to drop sooner or later, and deep down you know that. It is fundamental within a cult to separate information in insider versus outsider doctrine. It is foundational to shun those who disobey or disbelieve even a little. And we've seen how Trump just throws his aides that fail him, even a bit by accident, in reasonable ways. They go from being the best person ever to, always hated him, I gave him a chance and he blew it. This is not normal behavior, except for Trump. The man has no friends, or rather, in our experience, friend is just a word people use for someone they aren't done with, and we've seen the example in Trump many, many times. Do not fall for the cult tactics, and remember that no matter how smart you are, you can be tricked and brainwashed. Resisting the sort of brainwashing and cult tactics that people like Trump exercise require education to inoculate you against it. And part of the cult brainwashing process is discouraging the members from educating themselves. This is why they want to fire Dr. Anthony Fauci, longest standing and most experienced infectious disease specialist in our country during a pandemic. If Fauci is right, it might mean that Trump was wrong, and that would go against the authority and all-knowing power of Trump's cult. So get rid of those that disobey or disbelieve. If you don't, you're just as bad as the enemy. And remember, with a cult, there is no neutrality. Us versus them, black versus white, are what Trump and his cult functions on. Nobody within his cult can be wrong, and nobody outside of his cult can be right. And anybody who has never been part of a cult, even if they are on his side of the fence, the never-Trumpers are just as bad as the Democrats. Those are his words. Even a caravan of his supporters nearly running Biden and his bus off the road are patriots and did nothing wrong, but the anarchists and the agitators and the Democrats, nothing can be his fault, and it's always the other side, even if I could go out and shoot someone in the head in the middle of town square and wouldn't lose a single vote. If this is ever the statement made by your administration, it's a cult. It is our genuine belief that if we survive this darkened era, we'll look back on Trump and Xi and Putin and Bolsonaro and Johnson as a small phase wherein governmental order failed, as a strong and narcissistic pack of sociopaths around the world gained power and caused us to seriously consider what could be. We will know Trump as a madman akin to Hitler or Stalin, who could only care about themselves even as their nations were falling apart around them at their own orders. But for now, our concern should be to repair the bond. It's a cult's foundation to drive gaps between groups of people, between the cult and everyone else. But maybe we can return to the times wherein we aren't constantly pushing each other away, as Trump and his cult and the cults of other modern-day dictators have been, as they want. Distance and isolation and the ability to enforce cult rules on each other and separate us from each other is what gives cults power. Instead, let us try to see the best in each other and encourage each other to come together. Regardless of what you voted, we don't think you're a bad person, and we aren't going to give up on you because we can all be misled. What matters isn't getting offensive or defensive. What matters is getting educated. How long has it been since you looked at an article from the other side with an open mind? How long has it been that old political sciences textbook from your early college days? Have you seriously considered the more local bills and laws on the ballot and how it might affect those less fortunate than you? Have you remembered that we're all Americans and probably want the best for our country because actively wanting the destruction of the very place you live is a consistent rarity even these days, and most folks are pretty happy to be a member of this country and so clearly don't want to destroy America as Trump says they do? Have you considered that there's a more central viewpoint wherein people consider each other's opinions and sides instead of calling them some combination of snowflake, Nazi, rapist, terrorists, or anything else? And even if you don't like it, you can still not be a fucking asshat, and you can know that the symptoms of being a fucking asshat are more or less universal regardless of political leanings, and that you don't have to be one. Have you considered taking that path anytime soon? We found in our time on the streets that treating people with absolute most respect is the best way to find out exactly who they are. An asshole will take advantage of your submission and respectful demeanor, and any overstepping that is pointed out is your fault for being on your best behavior, that you should be tougher, that you are a loser, etc. Moreover, they will manipulate you constantly, seeing you as an easy target to get anything from. They will ascribe motive to you whenever they can to avoid having their own motives questioned. This is the sort of mode Trump uses. He overpowers, and if you can't overpower him, you're the loser, and he's the winner. And he can take anything he wants from you and say anything about you because they let you when you're famous. But truly respectful people we'd want to spend time with. They see that we're being submissive and respectful in conversation, and even if they don't offer us a turn, they don't interrupt us. They go out of their way to offer us opportunities when they see we need them. They don't use their power against us. And they don't make assumptions about us. They ask in confidence, and they don't misrepresent us. You might have ideas of what is going on through someone's mind, but you really have no idea at all until you ask and look with due diligence and patience and respect. And maybe instead of labeling someone with leftist or Democrat or Republican or conservative, we should start, once again, knowing voters and individuals in our society on an individual basis. No voting bloc is a monolith. No group of people is the same. And in this day and age, even husbands and wives very often vote differently. We know it's a bad take to say that our political divisions don't need to drive us apart. To a certain degree, they always will, and there are things we cannot just agree to disagree on because they can be dangerous or directly rejecting facts. But we can control exactly how we behave and address these issues and can make social moves that do not alienate or other people. Sure, they vote for someone different, but you don't have to regret a child and start creating fanciful and derogatory terms like libtard or resort to hyperbolic labels like Nazi just because someone voted against you. No amount of hostility will make someone change their mind about who is the right person to vote for, and if it did, would you want to be the person to say you bullied somebody into changing their vote in what we like to credit as a democracy? We certainly wouldn't. So, we suppose, as the election is a single day away and tensions are running incredibly hot, we're saying folks should take a break and be ready to not explode. Do not let the division turn you into a person you wouldn't want to interact with. You can be angry, or sad, or distraught, or wroth. That's fine. Your feelings are valid things to be acknowledged, regardless of what actually happened. But please, don't let the ox that is your feelings run over the farmer that is your logic and decency. Please. If you're really pissed, consider dedicating yourself to the political process instead of going fucking insane on someone for voting against your party. Nobody who is voting for Trump legitimately wants the end of America or is worth attacking in the streets or being a shithead to. Most of them have nothing to do with that and live in a much smaller world. Again, nobody is immune to being misled, and nobody wants the destruction of their home country just for the funsies. We joke about people just wanting to see the world, but that's not half of the entire fucking nation. Average voters don't want rampant violence and hate on the streets. They just want to get this over with and go about their life like we all do. The average voter has nothing to do with this particular problem. This is a systemic issue of a cult of personality and a first world nation that maintains a system that allows it. We'd even go so far as to say that the average voter bears no responsibility at all in the present Trump administration. Trump didn't win the popular vote, and we don't think he will this year. He will this year, but he might well win the electoral again. So don't go down and burn your Trump voters' neighbor's house down if old Orange Julius Caesar pushes through the Electoral College like in 2016. Please don't start fights or blast alarmist hatred on social media and threaten to move to Canada for the 5th election in a row. We've seen it. It happens every election. You're not fooling anyone. Just try yourself to be a decent person. Extremism breeds more extremism, and violence breeds more violence.